important, but really are. It's going to help this Jaguars defense. I'll tell you who they are in this episode of Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jags, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Thank you for joining me on the weekend edition of Locked On Jaguars. I'm your man, Tony Wiggins here. We thank you for making us your first listen on Locked On Jaguars. Just in case you guys don't know, I have actually covered this team it's going on a long time. It's been close to 13 years now that I've been covering the Jacksonville Jaguars franchise. So we've seen the highs and the lows, and hopefully what we'll do is see them rise from the ashes where they've been for a long, long time. And I'm going to tell you today how they have to do that. Now, I'm going to remind you, we're free on all platforms, and you can like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And please like and subscribe to the YouTube page as well at Locked On Jaguars. You can catch me at Shop Talking Wig on Twitter and follow the Locked On Jaguars page on Twitter as well. I'm going to talk about some guys that I believe on the team this year that will play pivotal roles. Pivotal. Ain't that something? Pivotal roles in the Jaguars' ascension from the ashes of the AFC South. And we're going to really, I used to be against that. I used to always say your goal is the Super Bowl, and I didn't want to focus on the division. But I think it's important that we do focus a little bit on the division first, because that's the first thing that you have to actually do, in my opinion, in order to have a successful shot at every single year, being able to put yourself in place to win the whole thing. So we're going to focus mainly, a lot of the things that I've been talking about has been really focusing on winning the division. I don't believe you need to build your team to beat the best team in the division. That's a big difference, and those are the things that I've actually differentiated with people. I don't think you have to say, okay, the Titans are this, so we have to be that in order to beat them, because the ultimate goal is to win the Super Bowl, but you have to win the division first. But I just don't think you aim to beat a team or build your team to beat a team. I think you have to know what you believe is a good football team and see what you have, and then build your team from that perspective. And then you get your own identity, and hopefully that's good enough to win. But one of the things you need to win is you need role players, and you need guys that that can play in a pinch, that are going to be unselfish, guys that will also at any given moment, they can play and be a starter, or they can give you a stretch when you have a starter that's banged up, or sometimes you need a blow and you don't want that big of a drop off. Because in football, you don't have the ability to control most of the time, except in rare cases where you can control the ball on offense. But sometimes the game and the ebb and flow of the game does not allow you to know when you're going to need a blow, and you have a critical player that has to be on the field. Sometimes you worn them out. I'll give you a case in point. If a team goes back and they're chunking that thing down the field all game because they know they can't beat you without big plays, and your DBs and your pass rushers have been coming at it, ears pent back, pass rushers, DBs constantly running back up and down the field, and then you get to the point where something may happen and you give up a score on defense or a score when you're on offense with a turnover or special teams, and that game gets tight. Well, now you may have key players and key positions that are gassed, that are sucking for wind, and they're really, really tired, and you need those backups to come in and be able to hold you down for a little while. That's why these role players have to be so important. So we're going to set this up, and I'm going to tell you something, a little bit of a thing that's going on out there right now is, well, the Jaguars used all of this money and some of these resources, and we're going to talk about Chad Muma because that was one of the players that they got in the third round. This thought that every player picked in the third round needs to be a starter because your team is a bad team. How about a novel idea that I discussed at some point before? A novel idea is this: when you draft, you just get the best players, and it'll play itself out. Even if Chad Muma isn't a starter, but we'll go through that a little bit. But this thought that you wait to get room lifters or you wait to get backups when you finally have gotten your frontline players that you need, your leaders. Okay, you picked Trevor Lawrence and you picked Trayvon Walker and you picked all of these guys, and You go back, if you think about it, the Jaguars have picked in the top 10 probably more than anybody in NFL history the last 10 years. And some of those guys have panned out and some of them haven't. So this thought that you need to keep swinging for guys at certain positions merely because those are positions that you have to fill out on your team. You need a quarterback, you need a wide receiver, you need a left tackle, you need a defensive tackle, you need a center, you need a right tackle, you need a top line corner, and you need a center field at safety. Those things. Until you get those positions, your team isn't going to be complete and your team isn't going to be good. Like, you got to hit a home run at all of those spots. I couldn't disagree more. I think what you have to do is, because when you think about it like that, you're only thinking that the only way to fill those positions is to hit home runs in the draft or free agency with early round selections or big money free agency. And then what's going to happen is those guys have to pan out. So what happens when you're like the Jacksonville Jaguars and they haven't panned out? You're totally eliminating another aspect of your team, and what that is player development. You're eliminating it. Seattle, through the years, especially when they had the Legion of Boom and they were winning, and for a decade they were one of the best teams in the league, missed on an awful lot of first-round picks. The Patriots missed on an awful lot of first-round picks. But because they didn't just depend on that, they depended on player development, they were able to both be very, very successful. Of course, New England had the best run of anybody. So not addressing players or drafting players or signing players that you have clearly identified are good players, but they might not be at a better need, or they might not be at an immediate need position, and then having people say that they're mistakes. It's like hustling backwards, and it's like double jeopardy. You can't pass up a good player because you already have a guy at his position and expect that that's going to work out for you. You have to. I saw a cooking show where a guy goes, everything has to have its own identity. You season every little piece, or every little, at every stage, everything has to have its own identity, even if you're going to combine it and bring it together. You just can't use too much salt, right? I think in football, everything has to have its own identity. When you're drafting high, you hope to get the best player you can for your franchise, and you think about the position. When you go out in free agency, you're spending big money on players that you hope can play as good as you thought they were at somewhere else, or that their best footballers ahead of them, a la Christian Kirk. Because you're spending a lot of money on it, it's pivotal that you hit on those guys, because money is something that you can't spend a lot of and not have it work out, or it kind of crushes your ability to add players to your team. The other thing is, the third part is, the guys that you get late that you think have potential, you hope to develop those guys individually so that they can compete. I'm going to tell you why that's so important, and then I'm going to get into the guys that I believe have a shot to help the Jaguars this year lift themselves from the ashes and out of what I call football purgatory. We're going to do that in just a second here in segment 2 on Locked On Jaguars, after I tell you about Built Bar, the coconut brownie chunk puff. That's right, you heard me. Coconut brownie chunk puff. What that is, the people at Built Bar who invented healthy and tasty comes the latest gift to your taste buds. You probably tried the amazing coconut brownie chunk Built Bar, but guess what? Your friends at Built have given coconut brownie chunk the puffs treatment. Now, you know, the puffs is a protein-infused marshmallow that is absolutely delicious, has a little bit of a different texture from the Built Bar, which has a great texture. They have something in common, though. They're both covered in 100% real chocolate. So it's whether you want the bar, whether you want the fluffy, you can get them both in the same great flavor at Built Bar. Stop drooling and listen to me, man. Go to Built.com and enter the promo code LOCKED15. You're going to have a chance to get 15% off. You're going to have a chance. You're going to get 15% off of your order. Make sure you use the promo code LOCKED15. Now, in case you're wondering, I told you about all of this great taste. In case you're wondering, the macros are off the charts, especially for those of you who are continuously trying to work out and keep yourself in shape. They have low calorie, low sugar, they're high in protein, and they're all absolutely delicious. So make sure you go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15 for your order to have 15% off of that order. All right, we thank you for joining us and making us your first listen here on Locked On Jaguars. As always, we are absolutely thrilled to have you here with us. We're talking about role players. So I was just telling you during the break that one of the reasons that you want role players to develop and actually eventually become starters for you, or guys who can be productive players for you, is because most of the time you get those guys, I wouldn't say at a discount, but what it is, you're not paying as much for them because you either picked them late, or you signed them to prove it deals, or you got them with the intent on the fact that they're not your starters, they're backup players, but you might need them to really, really play a key role. Those players exist. When you think about the really good teams, there have been a lot of good teams over the years where you knew who their third linebacker was when they were only playing two. There have been a lot of good teams over the years when they were playing three linebackers, and you knew who the fourth guy was because he was a key cog in that defense. There's a lot of times you know who the non-starter situational pass rusher is. There's a lot of times when you know who that swing guy is, who can play inside and outside on your defensive line. That gives you an edge. There's a lot of times you know who that third safety is, and you know who your fourth corner is, and they have a chance to really play for you. Now, you notice I'm just focusing on defense today because we've talked about the playmakers. We've talked about ETN yesterday. We've talked about the offensive line. So I'm really focusing on how you can develop that defense and make sure that you understand that it's extremely important. There are times, and this is the other thing, when guys' contracts are up and they're getting a little older or longer in the tooth, or they played well, but you're just thinking they might only have a year left, but they want a long-term deal, and you can't really think, especially if you're a playoff type team. At some point, you can't pay everyone. So when you think you might have to let a guy go, it's an easier decision for you when you know you have a guy in-house who's under contract for another year or two, who's younger, who is ascending to be able to do some of the things that you want done or that you were getting done from that productive player. So once you start to become a really good team, you have to start preparing yourself when you're not a good team. You have to do the things that good teams do. And the things that good teams do is they always, if they can't operate with retention, they always have an opportunity to fill in from within. And the only way you do that is to at least expect at some point your guys are going to develop. You know, player development has been a big problem in Jacksonville, right? So I don't consider player development like James Robinson coming in as a rookie and just lighting the world up. That just means people didn't know how good he was. When I talk about player development, I'm talking about Antonio Brown when he was in Pittsburgh. Came in, he was a special teams player. He was a punt returner. Eventually became a good, solid receiver. Eventually became probably one of the greatest wide receivers I've ever seen in my lifetime. That's what player development is. Player development is getting a guy, put him in your program. Don't put limitations on him. Don't sit him in a box and typecast him as just some guy who's just going to be a role player. How many times you heard here in the past, that's a special team signing? How many times you heard in the past, good solid backup would never be a great pro, but good guy to have on your team because he's like a Swiss Army knife? How many times in the past have you heard not a quality starter, but a decent guy you can have in the field who you can get some minutes out of? Those days are over. Those days are cheap replacement who can play a little bit of special teams. Those days need to be over. You need to be looking to squeeze every bit out of every single player here, or you're going to get the same result that you always got here in Jacksonville. So this talk that the Jaguars could not afford the luxury of using a third-round pick on Chad Muma, the third-round pick that they happened to get in the C.J. Henderson trade. So it's house money for one. Two, if you had Chad Muma rated as a second-round pick and he's there in the third round, you take him. He's their swing linebacker. That is an important role. So the argument has been you don't have to do that, Wig. You're not set at your starting positions. The Jaguars, when they selected Chad Muma, actually were pretty much committed to people at every single important position on the team. They drafted people or had retained folks or signed guys in free agency that at every single position, there was no position that you could look at with the guys who was in the draft and with what they already had on the team and say, they don't have a committed starter at that position. So why not go get a guy that you ranked higher to be your swing linebacker, even though you line up most of the time in a 4-2-5? If they end up in a 4-3 in certain situations because somebody's running the ball very well and they don't have a threat to pass the ball and there's no reason to be a nickel, Chad Muma is likely your starter at strong side linebacker. So tell me how it doesn't make sense if somehow you end up in a base 4-3, which they're going to be very multiple, and you need additional run support. How is it a waste to pick when your swing linebacker on a winning team is a very, very important player? This thought that you have to wait. A team is made up of a lot of elements. The elements are great quarterback, quality starters at all of the important positions, great leaders, and then you have role players, guys that I described in the first segment that know how to fit in, that know how to do this. Why do people believe that you have to wait until you get this to get that? Especially when you haven't been good at getting this. Everything has to have its own identity. You get this and that simultaneously, and that's how you end up being good. You don't have to wait. This talk back in the day was you don't select a great running back because you don't have an offensive line, or you don't get a quarterback because you can't block for him. Says who? Why do you have to wait? So if we have to wait, so we're going to draft an offensive lineman every single year until the line is fixed, and then we're going to draft a quarterback in year 6. At that point, one or two of those linemen, their contract is in and they're going to free agency. See, it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't click when people tell me stuff like that. So I think the addition of Chad Muma is being looked at inappropriately. Chad Muma is a high ankle sprain or a concussion and a concussion protocol away from being a starter. You don't want a whole ton of drop off from your starter to your swing guy. It's a very smart pick, and it does not, it doesn't take rocket science to understand why. So some of these narratives about how you build and why you build, and I have to remember that most people who understand how to build a team in Jacksonville learned from how to build a team from people that didn't do it very well. You don't wait. If a player is good, you get him. Iron sharpens iron. That's the only way you get better. Everybody's going to play. Those 20 snaps or those 15 snaps that Chad Muma has to play have to be starter reps. Another guy I think is going to help this team, and I'm glad they brought him back, was Adam Gostis. Adam Gostis at times last year appeared to be one of their 2 best linemen. You say, what's the significance of bringing back a guy who's not going to start? You can actually name versatile football players that are on these teams. For instance, Cincinnati lost their starting defensive tackle in the playoffs last year. And they had to go the rest of the game and get to the Super Bowl without him, right? The guy they brought in had to play. And he had to play well. Baltimore, all of these years when Baltimore was running their defense, you had guys rotating in and out you knew who all of those guys was because they were playing in a rotation system. They couldn't be drop off. If there's drop off, then you don't see them shuffle those players out and save those players that way. It's very, very important. You can walk and chew bubblegum at the same time, and I think the Jaguars have done a really, really good job. Another critical position along the defensive line is the big end / 3 technique, whatever you want to call it, however you serve it up. And we have 2 guys in Arden Key and Roy Robertson-Harris that are going to line up for this team that I think will provide a serious edge to Jacksonville. And I'll tell you what that edge is in just a second. In segment 3 of Locked On Jaguars. I also have to remind you guys that Locked On NFL is a daily podcast. I actually do the daily podcast on Locked On NFL every Wednesday, but it's on Monday through Friday. It's where you get all of your podcasts on every platform. It's free, as we don't charge, and it's guys from around the NFL that just give you the perspective that you cannot miss. So make sure you like and subscribe to Locked On NFL podcast wherever you get your podcast. And finally, I got to tell you about this. This is fun. We actually have a guy in this, so this will make you feel good. Starting on July 18th, Locked On gives you the 50 most valuable players in the NFL from the odds makers at BetOnline. It's available July 18th on Locked On NFL, wherever you get your podcast, and on YouTube. Make sure there is a Jaguar on there this year, so make sure you guys check that out. I'm going to tell you about BetOnline, man. BetOnline is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's Major League Baseball action. The Yankees are off to an incredible start, and they're doing their thing. The Angels, Anaheim, they have 2 of the best players in the league in Ohtani and Mike Trout, but yet still they can't win anything. So there's another nice little dynamic where you can go on BetOnline and figure out what you need to do when you start betting your money and wagering on sports. have live betting, esports, and all of the scores. And BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check on all of your favorite events, including boxing and MMA. And of course, golf. Tiger didn't make the cut, but there's still some good golf to be played. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action, because BetOnline is what? Is where the game starts. You guys start here with me on Locked On Jaguars every single day, making me your first listen, and I am grateful for that. We thank you as we always do. I talked about Arden Key and Roy Robertson Harris and why they're so important. They're so important to me because it gives you an extra pass rusher to go along with the interior, because you have to affect the quarterback. It gives you an extra pass rusher. And they also have size and length. And the way that the Jaguars are going to play and the way they're going to line up, I think it's going to be a lot like what Wade Phillips used to do in Denver, where the positions won't necessarily be traditional and defined. Like, you won't just have the nose tackle and then have a 5 technique or a 3 technique, or a nose tackle and have a big end. I think guys are going to 2 gap. I think Mike Caldwell is going to line guys up, put guys on the field, and let them do things that they specifically do well and try to fit it all into this little box. So I don't believe that it's going to be traditional the way we think. It's pretty much going to be those guys going to play a position that Vernon Golston played in Tampa, where he's big enough and stout enough to play against the run. Adam Gostis will do some of this also. That's why he's important and coming off of the bench. Bigger guys that can hold up against the run, that can also penetrate as pass rushers while other guys take up blocks. They can set the edge, and I think the better they can play, they also free up the guys on the outside, and Trevon Walker, and of course, Josh Allen. Arden Key was a good signing. Arden Key, when he came out, people thought that he was going to be a top 10 pick. He ended up going in the 3rd round to the Raiders. But he played very, very well in a role with the 49ers last year as the 3rd pass rusher. And he played very, very well, had, I think, about 6.5 sacks on the year. And I thought it was a great signing when the Jaguars got him. And when they got him, it made people think that they weren't going after defensive end in the draft, that they were going to pretty much go for a lineman. But once again, what we see is they still went and got Trevon Walker. What we see is them not waiting until Walker or everyone else proves that they're good enough before they go out and add a piece like Arden Key that's a reserve, or he may start. But the thing is he's the type of guy you're going to need on this team, whether your frontline guys or the guys that you placed in leadership positions succeed early or not. You're going to need that role player, that veteran guy who he can be the Joe Schmingy, if you will. I know I'm dating myself, put to the old school Jaguar fans. He can be the Joe Schmingy of this unit. You know, you think about the swing defensive lineman for a lot of good teams, and all the good teams have guys just like Arden Key. And Roy Robertson Harris probably didn't have the season he wanted to have last year, but you can't overlook the 6'6" frame, the 290 pounds. I think now with the change in the way things are done, you're going to be able to see Roy Robertson Harris. There's also a small chance that you see both of these guys line up together with Fadukazi lined up at the nose or in the middle. I think Fadukazi is a little bit more than just a nose or a road grader. I've seen some lineups from guys that I respect that haven't had him and Devon Hamilton both in the starting lineup. I think they will be. And then that means I think these other 2 guys will do a little bit of rotation. The thing with Arden Key, too, he can also play with his hand off the ground standing up. Therefore, he gives you the extra edge guy just in case he has to play a little bit with, standing up. I do know he can also play base 4-3 if the Jaguars have to go to a 4-3 because the 3-4 isn't working. Like, once again, I said, they're going to be multiple fronts. So the key players, guys that have to play key roles that may not be starters or may not be your front line, may be starters, but they might not be your front line leaders, but they still have to play well. Chad Muma, the rookie, who is expected to be the 3rd linebacker, whether he starts or not depends on how they line up. Adam Gostis, who they re-signed, who was really, really good for them last year. And I thought he was a guy who was going to get a lot of money free. I didn't think he was going to break the bank, but I thought you see him get like a 3-year, $15, $20 million deal from teams that I think if the Jaguars won more games, he would have gotten that money. By the way, he used to be my neighbor too, real nice guy. or Art Key and Roy Robinson Harris, guys that really have to step up and show up for the Jaguars to fulfill their potential. They have a chance to do all of that this season. Yeah, you guys have a great weekend. Take care of each other. Remember, when we return to 5 days, because training camp is coming up and football season. So from here all the way to next June, we're going to be 5 days a week again here on Locked On Jaguars, and we appreciate you. Tell all your friends, man, make sure you check out the podcast every single day on all platforms, including YouTube. Do me a favor, take care of each other. Training camp is almost here. We don't have that much longer to go. And Big Bo is going in the Hall of Fame here. I think we got less than 3 weeks now, and the Jaguars are going to invade Canton and show them how we get out. Until then, you guys take care of each other, and we'll see you starting again 5 days a week